comes to being an entrepreneur, does having ADHD make it easier or more challenging? Well, let me tell you, as a midlife entrepreneur who was late diagnosed with ADHD, it's complicated. Welcome to this video where I'm going to be sharing my own personal experience of running a business with ADHD, the pros and the cons, because it is a bit of a double-edged sword. Now, hi, if you've not come across me before, I'm Bev. I've been in business for the last 6 years. I always call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I didn't start my own business until I was 52. I was diagnosed in January 2022 with ADHD, which answers a huge amount of questions when I look back over my life at some of the things I found challenging. But let's just say I think there are definite pluses and some very definite challenges when it comes to running a business with an ADHD brain. So I want to start really with some of the positives, because I think if you've lived with ADHD, whether you've known it's ADHD, whether you knew it had that name or not, you've probably, if you're anything like me, always felt a little bit different. Always felt like the things that other people found quite easy were a challenge. And you know, getting my diagnosis a year and a half ago didn't make those challenges go away. It just brought them front of mind. It made me more aware of the things that I'd always struggled with, and it allowed me to be a little bit more forgiving about my flaws. But it also helped me to really understand and appreciate the elements of my brain anatomy, if you like, the elements of that part of my brain that actually have some real positive sides to them. So I want to start with the elements of being an entrepreneur that align really well with some of the strengths that my ADHD brain brings. Certainly as an entrepreneur, one of the best things for me is autonomy. I worked for 32 years in an employed role for the same employer. Probably worked a little bit longer than 32 in reality, because I had a few years before I joined the public sector. But in that time, I was quite constrained by the structure and the kind of the rules, if you like, that I had to follow. Never really felt like I was doing work that was particularly purpose driven. I always took pride in the work that I did, but I never felt like I had an awful lot of autonomy over my workload. I certainly didn't have autonomy over how I spend my time and where in the day I work. So I had conditioned hours. You know, I was working from 8 till 5. Although we had a flexible working system, it just gave me an extra hour or so either side of that. So it wasn't really ideal, because I'm a night owl. My brain really does come alive around about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and that's when I often get some of my very best work done. And I couldn't do that as an employee working for the MOD. It just didn't give me that level of flexibility. So being an entrepreneur and working for myself has given me that autonomy to be able to choose my own hours, to be able to work at the times when I'm most energized, when I feel most creative, when I feel I'm at my best. So from an entrepreneurial point of view, or from a business owner point of view, I'm able to structure my business in a way that gives me that ability to work to my own agenda. So I try now not to start work before 10 o'clock a.m. I certainly try not to book any calls before 10 o'clock. And that allows me to fit in, you know, the work I have to do with other people's timescales, but it means that I can work a bit later into the evening and not worry about having to be up early the next day, which suits me absolutely fine. Some of the other positives that I think come with having an ADHD brain, or at least having my ADHD brain, and I think this is a really important point. Just because we have ADHD does not mean that everybody with ADHD are carbon copies of each other. We all have different strengths, we all have different weak areas, we all have different value systems and belief systems and confidence levels and competence levels. So I'm really talking about me here, and there may well be commonalities with other people who have ADHD, but I can only, of course, speak for me. But one of the benefits for me is the impulsive element of my ADHD. Now, I actually was diagnosed with the inattentive type. Just in case you don't know, there are 3 categories of ADHD. You've got the inattentive type, you've got the impulsive hyperactive type, which is probably what most of us are a bit more familiar with when we think about ADHD. And then there's a combination of both. Now, I was diagnosed with inattentive type because I didn't quite reach the threshold for a combination of ADHD, the inattentive, impulsive, hyperactive. However, I think it's more that it wasn't enough of an impairment for it to be formally diagnosed, but I am definitely impulsive. I tend to make decisions very quickly. I tend to want to fail fast and move on, and I'm not really that frightened of taking risks and making decisions quickly. So that does come from the impulsive side of my ADHD. And in terms of hyperactivity, probably not physically hyperactive now, although I probably was when I was a lot younger. And in many ways, that's a real blessing when you're an entrepreneur, because you want to be able to make decisions quickly when opportunities arise. You want to be able to kind of trust that if you make that impulsive decision, somehow or other, everything will work out okay. You might not make the best decisions, but the worst possible decision you can make is no decision. So having that ability to move fast and get things moving and learn as I go is an absolute benefit. There are some challenges with that, which I'll talk about in a moment or two, but that ability to take risks and act fast and be that little bit more impulsive in my decision making certainly has its value and has benefits. I think the other elements of my ADHD brain that work well as an entrepreneur are the fact that we have an interest-driven nervous system. Our brain and our chemical makeup is the dopamine hits that we get are interest-driven as opposed to importance-driven. So in terms of being an entrepreneur, it means that I'm very good at having lots of ideas and finding lots of things that are of interest. And once I'm interested in something, I will move very quickly with it. I'm very good at starting new ideas, not always that great at finishing them. We'll come on to that in a bit. But that sort of novelty, that curiosity, that interest drive that I have means that as an entrepreneur, I'm very curious, and I like to research new things and try new things, and I have a tendency to say yes to lots of things, which is great because I'm very motivated by novel and new things. And again, one of the things I'm learning about ADHD, the more I get used to my own neurology, is that there's paradoxes all the way. We thrive on novelty, we get things done, we like anything that's really interesting. But the paradox is we often don't follow through with all of these ideas. So we're not great at kind of seeing things to completion. So there are sort of pros and cons, as I've already mentioned. I think one of the other benefits of being an entrepreneur with an ADHD brain is I have an amazing ability to hyperfocus. When I find something that I'm interested in, or when I have a deadline, or when I have something that I'm motivated by, I can hyperfocus so well, which means that if I've got something that I want to get done, I can easily work for hours on end getting that thing done, which is brilliant because quite often, as entrepreneurs, we need to work long hours, and being able to hyperfocus is an absolute bonus. Not always long-term sustainable, and there is a risk of burnout when you have that kind of hyperfocus. It does mean that the mental load can be really challenging. So quite often if I go into a period of hyperfocus, it's followed by a real dip in motivation, a dip in energy. But having that ability to really sort of knuckle down and just blot out anything else is, at times an absolute bonus. That gives you a bit of a flavour for some of the things that I think are very good. Let's talk a little bit about the things that aren't necessarily so good, because there are some challenges, and I think it would be a bit unfair to those who really do struggle with ADHD symptoms. We're on a spectrum. Some people are much more affected and impaired, if you like, by their ADHD than others. There are a lot of elements that go into that. A lot of it has to do with our upbringing, how supported we felt as we were growing up, whether we were encouraged or chastised because of our ADHD, even though it probably wasn't known as ADHD for our behaviours. Let's probably put it a different way. There are so many environmental factors that play a part in how we manage and cope with those ADHD traits and tendencies. So, it would be very disingenuous of me to suggest that having ADHD is some kind of superpower when it comes to being an entrepreneur. I was listening to a really interesting video yesterday with Dr. Russell Barkley, who was talking about ADHD and entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of research and a lot of studies that suggest, and certainly a lot in the media, that suggests that if you have ADHD, you're more likely to be a successful entrepreneur. And I don't know that that's quite fair. There's an awful lot of people with ADHD who are really, really struggling. So I think there's an awful lot of factors that come into that. But so I want to balance this and be realistic about what those challenges have been for me. Hang on a sec. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, is that I'm not great at creating my own structure. And again, this is where some of those paradoxes come in. I hate structure. I hate feeling sort of confined to systems and processes and all of those sort of constraints that we associate with structure. But without it, I'm not great at creating that sort of structure within my day, which means that I can go off track very, very quickly. So when I was working in a full-time job, working for an employer, the structure was there. I had my terms and conditions of service, which meant I knew exactly when I had to be at work, what I had to do while I was there. I was accountable to my manager. I was accountable to my team. So I had structure in place. Now, it didn't always feel great, but I knew I needed it. When I started working for myself and that structure wasn't there, it meant that it could, sometimes I'd procrastinate too much. Other times I would feel overwhelmed because I wouldn't have a real feel for what it was I needed to get done. I've learned over the years to find ways and software and things that will help me to be more structured. But in actual fact, what I've had to do is bring in people to manage me, which seems a bit bizarre when it's your own business, doesn't it? But I have a VA who does a lot of the kind of the boring, mundane stuff for me, the repetitive tasks that I'm not great at staying focused on. I also have, I never quite know what to call it because she's so good at so many things. The title doesn't seem to fit, but we'll call her my operations manager, Claire. And one of Claire's main roles really is to manage me and give me that accountability and structure that I need to stay on track. So she kind of checks in with me at the beginning of the week and we talk about what I need to get done, and then she checks in a couple of times throughout the week to make sure it's happening. And she organises me, because one of the other cons, if you like, of ADHD, or certainly my ADHD, is that I'm not very organised. I'm quite untidy, probably an understatement. I have my own form of organisation, so actually most of the time I can find what I'm looking for, but it's not a useful way to be when you're working with other people. So organisation isn't one of my strengths. I have to have a lot of tools around me, so things like my electronic calendar that pings notifications at me. Without my calendar, quite honestly, if it's not on there, it ain't gonna happen. So I've had to get really good at remembering to put stuff in my calendar. It's so much better for me if somebody makes an appointment that is perhaps a Calendly link or something that I can just click on and it automatically populates my calendar, because that way I don't have to remember to do it. And I'm not very good at kind of forward planning, so when it's on my calendar, it will pop up ahead of the event, so it reminds me what I need to be doing, where I need to be, who I need to be meeting with. And there are lots of times if I do forget to put it on the calendar that I've missed appointments, which is not great. Other elements of organisation that are a problem with my ADHD brain is I'm not very good at forward planning. I suppose the way my brain works, it's very much in the moment. I'm very much focused on the here and now. Instant gratification, I think, is quite a big thing, which is why the impulsivity is high in sort of ADHD brains. And again, I'm generalising. This may not be relevant for everybody else, but this is my own experience. So, I need that kind of instant hit to say that I'm getting a reward from what I'm doing. So forward planning isn't ideal for me. I can't even really see it. Goal setting I find, quite difficult into the future. I can certainly set goals for the day, for the week, probably a couple of weeks, but beyond that, I find it almost impossible to plan that far in advance, which again, as a business owner, you kind of need that bigger, longer distance view of things, and that's why I have Claire to help me kind of stay on track and think ahead, and then sort of reverse engineer everything and bring it back to the here and now. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the things I also struggle with are getting started with things, especially mundane tasks. I can definitely move quickly on things I'm interested in, and I will start them, probably a dozen things at once. But actually starting something that doesn't interest me, or that I perceive is going to be challenging or boring, kind of gets pushed down the pile of priorities, and I will find a dozen different things to do that will make me feel very busy, but not necessarily focusing on the important things. But I said earlier, we have an interest-driven brain as opposed to an importance-driven brain. So even though I know that I need to do my accounts because it's really, really important, I know I need to do my tax return because it's really, really important, if it doesn't interest me, which it doesn't, unfortunately, I find it incredibly difficult to just crack on and do it and get started. And the weird thing is as well, time perception isn't great for with my ADHD brain. So my perception of how long something's going to take is quite skewed. And it's interesting, if it's something I'm interested in, I'll assume it's going to take me much less time than it actually will. If it's something that I don't want to do, that I find is challenging, my perception is that it's going to take much longer than it actually does. So once I do manage to get started, and the reason generally that I need to trigger enough dopamine to get me over that sort of off the starting blocks, is normally when the consequences become too high if I don't do something, which is why deadlines and things are very useful to me, because they help get me off those starting blocks. Once I get going, generally speaking, I can get things done quite quickly, even the mundane stuff, if there's a strong enough deadline. But it's a stressful way to be, and it's not great for the rest of the people on my team, like my bookkeeper, my accountant, when they're waiting for stuff. It's challenging if they have to wait till the last minute. But I do find that a real problem, that getting started on stuff that I don't really want to do. The other thing is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, I can get started very, very quickly on things that do interest me. But as soon as I've kind of got over the novelty of getting that idea rolling and getting it started, I'm not great at finishing projects. So the term is completer finisher. That's not me at all. I'm done. I'm on to the next thing. My brain's going on to the next thing. So actually, when you have your own business, you kind of have to finish things. And I find that a struggle. And again, this is why I have my VA, is why I have Claire as my operations manager to help me actually get things finished. So there are challenges. And the other thing with starting so many things is that quite often I don't prioritise the most important things, which means that I can get real shiny object syndrome and get distracted from the important stuff by the interesting stuff. So that's a challenge as well. I've already said my time management is pretty rubbish, so being able to plan my week is difficult sometimes. I don't know how long things are going to take. I do know that if I have an important appointment at some point in the day, I find it very difficult to get started and get stuck into other things, because I have that on my mind the whole time. Well, I've got to remember this, I've got to be there, I've got to, I can't let this person down, or I can't miss this meeting. So actually, if there's something later on in the day, it kind of throws the rest of the day out. Time blocking has been really helpful for me in this respect. Again, using my Google Calendar. I'd actually use Google, but an electronic calendar, and time blocking things out and having reminders and alarms going off does help. I'm getting better at using those tools, but I do find that if I've got anything important on in a day, that day is likely to be less productive than a day when I've got nothing lurking in the background that I have to remember. Certainly challenges, and there's certainly benefits, but on the whole, I think as a way of life, the entrepreneurial lifestyle definitely suits my ADHD better. I can structure my day to fit my own requirements. I feel more in control of my time, more in control of the projects I want to take on. So all in all, for me, I definitely think the entrepreneurial life is a better fit. I don't know that I would go as far as to say I'm a better entrepreneur because of my ADHD. I can't know that because I don't know what it's like to not have it. So it might be that actually being more steady, if you like, not perhaps having the highs and the lows, the big pros and the cons, would make everything a little bit more steady, a little bit less like a roller coaster. Maybe that would be a blessing. Maybe that would make things easier. Or maybe it would mean that actually I wasn't as creative and, didn't find the same level of success. I don't know. How can I possibly know? Because it's not who I am. All I know is that being the way I am does seem to fit with working for myself much better than working for somebody else. So I hope you've found that insightful. Perhaps there's some bits that you can relate to. Perhaps there's some things that you think, I have no idea what that woman's talking about. I don't know. If you found it useful, give me a thumbs up. That would be really helpful. And if you're interested in following along with my journey, I send out a weekly newsletter every week. So I'll put the link below if you fancy connecting with me on email and staying in touch. Until next time, talk to you soon.